All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time you are tuning into this video, whether it's live or whether it's the recording. I welcome you and I congratulate you actually for spending this next 30 minutes with me to learn a really powerful tool that can help you with a variety of things, very versatile. So I'll talk about some of the ways that you can use this technique called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, also referred to as tapping, which you'll see why in a moment as I demonstrate the technique. My name is Lisa Smith, and I am the owner and trainer at the Coaching Center for Mind Training and Success. For 25 years, I've been using and teaching these brain-based transformational tools to help people to change well, I don't like to use the word bad, but to change behaviors that they're not happy with, to establish better behaviors that are more conducive to the goals that they have, the results that they want. It helps to gain emotional control. It's like control over your emotions. The person who controls their emotions helps to control their lives. Also, our thoughts, and help to change negative internal dialogue that we might be having with ourselves. It can help to change limiting beliefs like I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not important, what I have to say isn't important, I'm incompetent, etc. So these beliefs that we formed in our life based on experiences that we've had, the interpretation about those experiences, we make conclusions about ourselves that are less than helpful. And it can be challenging to change those beliefs and the behaviors and the results that they are creating in our lives. So EFT can be used for changing limiting beliefs as well. It can help to decrease stress, all kinds of things. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But again, really powerful tools such as EFT, hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming. We'll have a class on that on Monday. And PQ, positive intelligence and mental fitness. Have a class on that later in the week. I think that's on Wednesday or Thursday, but there's a schedule for that if you are not already signed up on my email events list and you want to get the announcements about the additional classes that I'm doing throughout this week for Self-Improvement Month. I will be happy to add you to the list so you'll get the announcements as well as the recordings of all these classes so that you can review anything that you watched live or you can catch anything that you missed because you weren't able to be on there live. So you can just send an email to me at lisa@themindtrainingcenter.com and I will be happy to add you to the event list and make sure that you're getting those announcements throughout the week, as well as future things that I might be doing. So again, thank you for being here today and congratulations on spending this time to further your growth and your ability to create more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. So today we're talking about EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique. It's also referred to as tapping because we're actually stimulating particular points on the body that help to shift what's happening in the brain and even in the body itself. Now, the stimulation can be done through tapping, such as this, or any kind of stimulation, such as rubbing or just doing a pulsing pressure at any of these points. Some things are more conducive to a pulsing pressure versus a tap, and vice versa. And acupuncture uses needles and sticking the needles in these particular points of the body that acupuncture and the system that acupuncture developed thousands of years ago called the meridian system. And these particular points have sort of a magic in them that when they're stimulated through tapping, rubbing, applying a pulsing pressure, or in acupuncture, sticking the needle in it, we're doing needleless acupuncture, also known as acupressure, with EFT. And again, the stimulation of these particular points has been shown. First, it was experiential and theoretical, but now we've actually been able to develop instrumentation that does show that these particular points on the body have a different electrical frequency to them, and that when they're stimulated in one of these ways, it influences the brain, what areas of the brain are lighting up and activated, what is produced by that emotionally, chemically, physiologically. It relates to different organs in the body. Our nervous system is activated. The chemicals and hormones that our body is producing change when we're stimulating these points. And we can see that through blood tests before and after doing the process, the tapping. So it's really pretty interesting now that what was once theory and just experiential is now science has the capabilities to measure and see in a tangible way that these points actually do have something special about them, and the stimulation of them has all these different cascades of physical, mental, emotional responses that can be highly beneficial. So just very briefly about EFT, this was a technique that was developed in the 70s by a man named Gary Craig. And he actually, this is a shortened version from another initial technique called TFT, Thought Field Therapy, by Roger Callahan. And Gary is an engineer, so he likes simplifying things and making systems and processes out of things. And so he learned how to take the more extensive technique and bring it into something that was a more simplified technique, and that most people could use for most kinds of situations that they were experiencing, because the TFT technique was a little bit more complicated and you had to do certain types of points in certain orders depending on what specific emotion or issue you're trying to resolve. And so again, Gary Craig's EFT technique really helped to simplify that TFT process. So as I mentioned a moment ago, there's a lot of different things you can utilize EFT for. And I see that our participant dropped out here, but maybe they'll come back on, but I'll keep going, it doesn't matter. So the EFT can be used for shifting your emotions. Anytime that you notice that you're in a negative emotional state, whether it's fear, anger, overwhelm, frustration, confusion, any of those, what we call negative emotions, that generally will lead to some kind of negative action and then some negative result. Or it's, when we're stuck in a negative emotion, oftentimes it's sort of, we go into freeze mode and we're not very productive. And oftentimes then we go into rumination in our head. So usually emotions and thoughts are there together. Sometimes an emotion gets triggered first and then a thought process, sometimes a thought process, then an emotion. But when you're stuck in this negative emotional state, oftentimes you're not thinking productively, you stop yourself from taking positive action, or the negative emotion leads to some kind of negative action, and then negative actions usually lead to negative results. So I talk about the TIER formula in all of my work. Thoughts and emotions are what influence the actions that we take, and the actions that we take influence the results that we get. So if we're trying to change our results, we know we need to change the actions, but where people get stuck is they don't do a very good job at changing the actions because they're trying to change it at a conscious level. But usually what's driving the action, what's driving the bus, is at the subconscious level, and that's our thoughts and our emotions. So our thoughts influence the actions we take, the emotional state we're in influences the actions that we take. So these tools, these techniques that I teach and utilize with my private clients or in groups help to work on the thoughts and the emotions that lead to the actions and the results, so that you get better results if you learn how to create better thoughts and emotions and learn how to shift them when they're not in the place that you need and want them to be. So I mentioned before in terms of the ways that we can utilize EFT, the emotional states, the negative thinking, the ruminating sort of stuck thoughts, you could just keep thinking about something over and over again. The extremist kinds of thoughts, catastrophizing, for example, making things bigger than they really are, future pacing in the negative, like anticipating something negative happening in the future, even though it hasn't happened, but you're just thinking about it and imagining it. And oftentimes it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as what you think about, you bring about, right? So it's sort of like if you're driving down a highway and you see there's like nothing else around you, there's one telephone pole, and you keep focusing on that telephone pole, inevitably you're gonna drive into it. And there's actually statistics about this, right? So it's like, why do people run into these like random telephone poles or utility poles out in the desert where there's nothing else around? Why did they run into them? So again, oftentimes what we focus on, we give energy to, we tend to draw to us, or we tend to get drawn towards it. So EFT will help you to sort of just break out of that cycle, help you to break out of negative catastrophizing thinking, help you to break out of some kind of negative emotional state that's either keeping you stuck from taking productive action or is creating a chain response of some kind of negative reaction pattern and a result that you're not happy with. So getting into more specifics, I utilize this technique, and every technique that I teach are techniques that I first used for myself, found benefit from, got trained and certified to use them with others, to help others to gain the benefits of things that I've been able to gain the benefits of over the years by using them. So I've worked with thousands of people over the 25 years that I've been using these tools. EFT, probably I've been using, I don't know, at least 12 years, I believe. Hypnosis for 25 years. So things like helping people with weight loss by changing their food cravings, emotional eating, so if they're in some kind of negative emotion, and the way that they've trained themselves and gotten used to helping them to shift those negative emotions or numb from them for a little while is using food, eating. It helps with that. So if you're not eating when you don't need to be eating, or you're not eating more than you need to be eating, then usually that helps to assist the weight loss. Helping with other kinds of numbing behaviors or substance resources, such as drinking or smoking, shopping. So whatever those impulses are, when we're in a negative emotional state that feels uncomfortable and we're trying to get into a more neutral or positive emotional state, which is actually healthy. Being able to do that is healthy. Staying stuck in a negative emotional state is not beneficial for you mentally. It's not beneficial for you physically. You actually are suppressing the immune system, and you're more likely to get sick when you're constantly in a negative state. Also, it creates a state of stress, which breaks down the body, ages us faster, makes us more likely to get sick, diseases, etc. So being able to use it when you're stressed, when you're anxious, when you've got some kind of impulse craving, it helps with decreasing the attraction of certain foods. So one of the things that I'll be teaching about in the NLP class is about using NLP to help to change the attraction of certain foods. But EFT can help with that as well, because the attraction of a particular food, or when that thought of that food pops into your head, you've got all this stimulus going on from the past times where you experienced eating that food and the positive sensations, excuse me, emotionally, physically, that you had from eating that food, kind of reactivates your brain, lights it up, you get that dopamine hit, etc. So negative emotions, urges, cravings, anxiety, nervousness, anytime that an event occurs that stimulates some kind of negative emotional state, anger, frustration, overwhelm, etc. You're feeling stressed, overwhelmed with deadlines that you have, or you're upset about a dialogue that you had earlier with somebody and you're having a hard time letting that go, or again, it's causing you to want to go eat or drink or smoke a cigarette in response to it. These are all great opportunities to utilize the EFT. It can also help beyond just in the moment. So it's really good what we call in the moment first aid for something that triggered some kind of negative emotional response or thought process in you that you're trying to change. But it can also help you to change long-standing issues, such as beliefs, old limiting beliefs, such as I'm not lovable, that oftentimes is generated by prior events that had some kind of situation with that we interpreted as that means I'm not lovable, which is usually totally skewed because the majority of these limiting beliefs that we have are formed by the age of 7 when we're very young and we really don't know how to properly interpret the entirety of whatever situation is going on, and that it's not really usually about us at all. It's about the other people and what those other people who were doing what they were doing, saying what they were saying, were experiencing. But the EFT is really good at helping to deactivate the emotional re-triggering of past experiences that we had that keep getting triggered in the present. So when EFT is used for things like small traumas or big traumas, what we're essentially doing is we're not erasing the memory. Sometimes people come to me and like they've had a breakup and they're like, I wish you could just, can you just erase this memory? You do hypnosis or, whatever, and just erase this memory of this person. So I'm not thinking about them anymore and constantly being sad or upset. With EFT, what we're doing is we're deactivating the emotional charge relative to a particular past event that keeps getting re-triggered for us in the present, because it's not the event that's the problem. It's not what happened in the event. It's the emotional response that we had to what happened in the event. And it's wired into our nervous system. It's wired into our brains, even in our DNA. And different things will continue to re-trigger that, recreate that negative emotional response. And so we can use the EFT to deactivate the emotions that were originally formed from that event and that got stuck, and either greatly diminish them or completely release the emotions. Just like if you've got a lamp in a room with a light bulb, the lamp is plugged in, the light switch is on, the electricity is flowing into that lamp and into that light bulb, the light bulb is lit up. Well, if we don't want the light bulb lit up anymore, we can either remove the light bulb or we can just deactivate the electrical input that's going into the light bulb. So if we unplug the lamp or we turn off the switch, we turn off the flow of the electricity that's going to it, that's lighting it up. The light bulb can still be there, but it's not lit up. Same thing with our memories. We might still have the memory, but it doesn't get lit up anymore because we've deactivated, pulled the plug, turned off the switch of the emotion that was attached to it, and stop reactivating it or greatly dim it. So maybe we'll put the dimmer on instead of the off switch, but our goal really is to, completely disconnect it. But oftentimes just enough of a dimming is, we don't have such a strong emotional response to the situation. And so we're more likely to, or we're less likely to be reactionary to it anymore. If it's, say we use a 0 to 10 scale in the EFT to help to evaluate the intensity of the emotion that's causing disruption. And we can either get it down to a 0, or if we get it down to under a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, 1, it's less likely to create the response. So we have thoughts all the time, but we don't necessarily act on all the thoughts. We tend to act on the thoughts that have some kind of emotional charge to them, either positive or negative, but a stronger emotional charge. And so If we have a less emotional charge, it's not very much. Usually we don't feel this compulsion to act on the thought, okay? Same thing with conditioned responses. So that's sort of the premise behind the EFT. Again, there's a lot of scientific research papers that have been put out over the past 30, 40 years since EFT was developed. Thankfully, now we have many, many more evidence-based research studies that show the efficacy of these techniques like TFT and EFT. So let's go ahead and learn the EFT and how to do it. First thing I want to teach you is how to, or the places where you're going to actually stimulate through tapping, rubbing, or applying a pulsing pressure. And then I will teach you about how to measure the results using the 0 to 10 scale, as well as your body. And then I'll teach you a couple of quick techniques of different ways that you can use that. A very, very, very simple technique, and then the original, what we call the original formula, the basic technique that Gary Craig developed. There are some more variations to the original technique that's been developed over these 30, 40 years, but I'll teach you just this basic one. So the points that we're going to be using in EFT are right here, the karate chop, side of the hand. And then we've got the top of the head. We've got the eyebrow point. Now we've got one on the right side and one on the left side. Some are in the center, like the top of the head and under the nose, but some are, we've got a right point and a left point. So sometimes you can just stay on one side of the body, just tap all the right points and the center, or all the left points and the center, or do what we call bilateral tapping, tapping both of them at the same time. I generally recommend doing that because you're stimulating 2 points instead of one, right? And you're helping to balance the activity of the brain, right brain and left brain, by stimulating both the left and the right point. So eyebrow point is right here between the bridge of the nose and the beginning of your eyebrow. So right in this point here, and usually we use 1 or 2 fingers to stimulate that point through here. In this case, I'm doing tapping. Again, you could rub, especially if you're doing this for a headache, because it can help with physical things as well. I forgot to mention that. So if you're having a headache, it's really good for when you have headache. Pain, I've used EFT to help people with diminishing or eliminating pain, upset stomach, different physiological things it can be used for as well. But pain is the more predominant one. Next one is we've got side of the eye. So right here, outside the corner of your eye. And then we've got under the eye, right up under the center, and just on the edge of that cheekbone. And then you've got under the nose, and then you've got under the lip. It's also referred to as chin point, but it's not on your chin. It's in this little divot right above your chin. And then we've got the collarbone point, which is found by gliding your fingers down your collarbone here, right before you get to the hollow of your neck. You should have 2 protruding bones. If you have thicker skin up here, sometimes it can be harder to feel it, but right here, and it's generally, if you can see, it's right about squared with my chin here. Okay. There's also something, if you want to get the cheat sheet for this, feel free to email me. If you're on the events list, then I will send that to you. But if you don't want to be on the events list, but you just want the cheat sheet for that, again, you can email me at lisa@themindtrainingcenter.com and I'll send that to you. So on the sheet, it looks like it's right directly on the bones, but it's not. You want to be just a little bit below him. All these points are sort of in a divot area. Okay, so that's your collarbone. The next you have under the arm, which is about 4 inches below your armpit. I'm going to stand up for a moment to kind of show you where I'm at, right here on the side. And you'll see on the cheat sheet, it's just a little bit below the nipple point. So that's underneath. And then we've got under the arm. And if you're doing the bilateral, you can do it one of 2 ways. You can either do what we call the hug. So I would be going like this, tapping the sides, or the monkey. Okay, like this. Kids tend to like the monkey, although sometimes it's nice to kind of give yourself a hug. So the monkey or the hug if you're doing the bilateral for the underarm point. And then I go to the wrist point. Some practitioners don't use the wrist point. So there are some slight variations from time to time, depending on what you're watching or reading or who you're working with. But the wrist points, if you're doing bilateral tapping like this. And then we've got the top back up to the top of the head. Some practitioners after karate chop will start at the eyebrow point and end at the top of the head. After karate chop, I start at the top of the head and end at the top of the head. There's also a liver point up underneath the breast, but that's a little bit harder to get to, especially for women. So I generally skip that one. All right, so those are the points. Karate chop, top of the head, eyebrow or inside of eye, side of eye, also known as outside eye, under nose, under lip or chin point, collarbone, underarm, wrist, and back top of the head. Okay, so those are the points. Now, before we do any tapping or any of the stimulation of the points, what we want to do is identify as specifically as we can what disruption we're feeling and give it a label and then give it an intensity using a 0 to 10 scale. There's some other ways that you can measure it, but just for simplification and time, I'm just going to teach you this one. So the 0 to 10 scale, and then what specifically are you feeling? And if you can identify what triggered it, what it's associated with, that's also helpful when we get into the phrasing part. So what am I feeling right now? Maybe I'm overwhelmed. Why am I overwhelmed? Overwhelmed with this deadline I have to meet, right? Overwhelmed with all the work I have to get done today, right? Whatever it might be. Or fear, right? Fear of speaking at this meeting. This fear about driving over the bridge. Maybe it's a urge or a craving for a cigarette or for chocolate or just, eating. So what am I feeling that's disruptive? What seems to be triggering it or what's it associated with? And to what degree am I feeling it right now? 0 to 10, 10 being extreme, 0, not at all, right? So try to give it this number. It's subjective, 0 to 10, and then you begin the tapping. Now, very simple tapping technique is what I call the breathe and tap. So you simply tap on the karate chop as you take 2 to 3 deep breaths in and out. And just keep focusing on whatever that feeling is, letting yourself feel that feeling, not trying to deny it, pretend that it's not there, run away from it. Just let yourself be in that feeling, recognizing and acknowledging it as you're doing the tapping and the 2 to 3 deep breaths in and out at karate chop. And then you go to the top of the head and repeat 2 to 3 deep breaths here. Focusing on the feeling. Don't worry that focusing on the feeling is going to make it stronger. If you weren't doing something like the tapping, usually it would, right? Because what you focus on expands, you're giving more energy to it. But what we're doing with the tapping is we're actually helping, as we pull up the emotion, we're helping the emotion to process itself, to expend the energy of it and release it. Instead of stuffing it, we're trying to pull it to the surface and let it start to dissipate. Just like a stain in a piece of material, can't just deny that it's there, put something over it, right? We want to get rid of the stain. So we have to create a vibration to break up the bonds of the molecules of that stain. So it starts, those outer layers start to fall away, less and less and less, smaller, smaller and smaller, until, it's really, really teeny, not so much of a problem anymore, or completely gone, right? So as you're doing this stimulation, you're creating this vibration, which is helping the emotion to process itself, diminish itself, and to be released, right? So 2 to 3 deep breaths here, and then 2 to 3 deep breaths here at the eyebrow point. And again, for sake of time, I'm not going to do actual 2 to 3 deep breaths, but then you go to the side of the eye, 2 to 3 deep breaths. Under the eye, 2 to 3 deep breaths. You get the point, 2 to 3 deep breaths. At each of these points, going around. And there's a lot of things at play: the breath, the focus, the being in the present, the quieting your mind, all of these different things, along with the stimulation of the points, is helping your nervous system and your brain to deactivate that that triggering process and that emotion that got triggered. All right, so after you finish at the top of the head, one more final deep breath in and let it go. And then tune back into the feeling and the rating, 0 to 10. What number would you give it now after this one round of tapping? It should be less, at least a point. Sometimes it might not be, especially if you're really high up in the scale. Always give yourself the opportunity to do at least 3 rounds. Again, there's a whole lot more if you do the tapping and it doesn't seem to have an impact. There's other things you can do. It's not that the tapping isn't working. Sometimes there's more nuances of things that we need to focus on and do with the technique to help us better. So that's the breathe and tap technique. So if say I was at an 8 and now I'm at a 6, still pretty high. Anything above a 5 is still high, still problematic. Do another round, might notice now I'm down to a 5 or under a 5. Do another round. Continue to do rounds if you want. Keep going lower and lower and get it as low as you can. If you've done 3 rounds, doesn't seem to be going any lower, but you're still at a low point, great. You can move on. But if not, there's some other things you can do. Again, if you're kind of getting stuck at a point that still feels too high and you're still likely to be negatively impacted by that emotion or that thought. The basic technique is starting at the karate chop and doing a setup statement, even though I'm feeling blank about blank, such as even though I'm having this urge for a cigarette, or even though I'm having this urge for chocolate, or even though I'm stressed and I want to eat something, right? That's an example of how you do that. Fill in the blank with a setup statement. Even though I'm feeling this way because of I'm angry at John for being late, etc. To fill in the blank, so it's very versatile. And then the second part is an affirmation statement, such as I forgive, love, and accept myself, or I love and appreciate myself anyway. A lot of different ways that you can do that. But again, on the sheet, and the original technique was I forgive, love, and accept myself, or I forgive, love, and accept this feeling. So that's what the statement that you say 3 times as you're tapping on the karate chop point. And then at the rest of the points, you're just going to repeat what the feeling is, like this urge to eat, or this urge for a cigarette, or this anger at John, or this overwhelm about all this work, this feeling of overwhelm about all the work I have to do, feeling overwhelmed about all the work I have to do. Okay, you just keep repeating that phrase about what the feeling is, or the feeling and the trigger to it. This overwhelm about all the work I have to do. Overwhelmed about all the work I have to do. This overwhelm about all the work I have to do. That's one full round. And then you stop, take a deep breath, let it go. Check the rating again, 0 to 10. How strong does it feel now? And like I said before, when I was explaining the breathe and tap, if it's still above a 5, it's usually going to be problematic for you. Keep doing rounds of the tapping and get it as low as you possibly can. Okay, so sometimes it only takes a couple of minutes to really notice a big shift, depending on what number you're starting with. Sometimes it takes, several minutes to do that. Sometimes you have to, work on it 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but give yourself grace, give yourself time, give yourself the opportunity to allow the nervous system and the brain to benefit from the stimulation of these points in the ways that we have shown it helps, and just de-escalate the emotion, de-escalate the thought process, deactivate the old stuck emotion from the prior, past experience that keeps getting re-triggered in the present. So very quick primer on EFT. Thanks for attending today. And if you're watching this recording later and you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have about this technique or any of the other techniques that I'm doing in the series. Again, it's Lisa at themindtrainingcenter.com. And if you want to be on my event list so that you get the cheat sheet and the announcement about other classes that I'm doing in the self-improvement month over the next week, then you'll get those announcements. Or if you just want the cheat sheet, you don't want to be added to the events list, then when you email me, just let me know that. I'd be happy to send it to you. Thanks for participating today, and happy tapping.